It's Video Game Trivia 101 that the PlayStation 2 is the console that has sold the most units worldwide. Beyond its financial success though, the PlayStation 2 is well remembered and beloved by millions for having one of the best video game libraries of all time. Nearly 23 years on from its launch, the PS2 is still capable of providing hours of entertainment thanks to these games. I'm Si for WhatCulture.com and here are 10 PS2 games that still blow our minds. Number 10, Shadow of the Colossus. A very close runner-up for this list was 2001 adventure title Ico. Team Ico's debut still looks gorgeous today, demonstrating some of the best graphics that the PlayStation 2 has to offer. Somehow its spiritual successor Shadow of the Colossus looks even better, which is remarkable considering the demands it's making to the console. Colossus's world is sizable, but what's more important is that its wildlife is also. In fact, Colossus was perhaps the first game that almost ensured most players would stop and stare at least once at what they were beholding. Wait, you mean I have to fight that? Large-scale bosses like this with full-body autonomy had previously been unthinkable. The 6th generation of consoles was absolutely where the conversation of video games as art picked up, and chief amongst titles that people were pointing to as evidence was Shadow of the Colossus. Whilst climbing the hulking colossi was exhilarating in its own right, it also felt humbling to play because of its sense of scale and the player's place in that world. Shadow of the Colossus took big risks by avoiding what most expected out of video games of the era, telling its own tale and forging its own path that many have followed, but rarely bettered. Number 9, Kingdom Hearts. If you own some of the most recognisable characters in media, it stands to reason you're going to be protective of their usage. That's not to say that there weren't Disney games developed by outside studios before the PS2, but most of them tended to be very straightforward adaptations, or at the very least built clearly within Disney's given parameters. Whilst crossovers are so common these days that they're almost a given, Kingdom Hearts was video games' first multiverse of hitherto unseen madness. Donald Duck and Goofy are cast as RPG warriors alongside the very on-brand, spiky-haired square protagonist Sora, and the game has them go in search of King Mickey and unwrap a convoluted story about darkness and hearts. They encounter Final Fantasy characters, fly through space, team up with the likes of Aladdin and Ariel, and encounter a legion of heartless monsters and the betrayal of Sora's childhood friend. American creative capitalist IPs combined with Japanese storytelling to combine into something wholly unique. Its sequel basically outdid it in every regard, but Kingdom Hearts 1 still needs its praise as one of video games' most insane crossover events. Number 8, Gran Turismo 3 and 4. If you can say anything for driving sims, it's that they've always been at the forefront of pushing graphical fidelity. For example, Gran Turismo 3, the first major release for the series on the PS2, was hugely impressive. Whilst it has far less content than its PS1 predecessor, it more than makes up for this with its incredible shaders, reflections, and other jaw-dropping details. It's the small touches like being able to see trees and light overhead reflected on a car's paintwork in real time that we take for granted now, but GT3 did what seemed impossible. Its sequel, however, improved on this in every aspect. Not only does it look even better, it runs at a smooth 60 FPS without ever stuttering, something that many modern games struggle with even 20 years later. What's more, it gives players the option to play in 480p, 480i, or even 1080i resolutions, making it one of the first HD games ever. The game features one of the first notable examples of a photo mode in history, and of course it's stacked with over 700 cars and 50 tracks. GT4 is still arguably the only racing game you'll ever need. Number 7, Rogue Galaxy. Rogue Galaxy could have been a defining RPG for the PlayStation 2 if it hadn't come as late as it did. Whilst Japan got the game in 2005, the Western world didn't see it until 2007 after the PlayStation 3 had already been released. Ironically, Rogue Galaxy is so pretty that it could almost be mistaken for a PlayStation 3 launch title. Ergo, it deserves to be in the conversation for one of the best looking PS2 games ever. Taking a stylistic approach means that the game avoids some of the more jagged textures that the console was sometimes known for. Rogue Galaxy moves incredibly smoothly, both exploring its luscious location variety and in and out of its random encounters, which take place in the adventure field. Even better, the game is basically loading screen free. This is made made all the more impressive by the game's scope as you explore multiple worlds as part of your Star Wars-esque space pirate adjacent adventure. Rogue Galaxy is far from perfect as its side quest design gets a little repetitive and its story is certainly hit and miss, but even still today it has undeniable charm. Number 6, God of War 2. Unlike Rogue Galaxy, which flew under the radar in 2007, God of War 2 was considered the perfect title for the system to take a bow on. After all, this generation had really excelled in the action genre with its more advanced character models and bigger range of realistic animation, allowing for far more technically impressive set pieces and combat. The original God of War was an absolute sea change in this regard, but its sequel took everything it did right and amped it up to 11 whilst stamping up and down aggressively on any minor quibbles. The cinematic, very authored action game ran a fine line between the remarks of "it's like an interactive movie" and also somehow the most intense gameplay experience on the system. Additionally, it just flows like butter and controls like a dream. God of War 2 laid the groundwork for high-octane, action-oriented titles for the next generation and beyond. In fact, one could argue that its impact on gaming has been so great it's the reason that God of War's 2018 reboot had to dramatically change direction to stand out from games it had previously inspired. Number 5, Soul Calibur 3. Whilst the likes of Virtua Fighter 4 and Tekken 5 stand out as some of the best fighting games the PlayStation 2 has to offer, it's Soul Calibur 3 that's perhaps the most bold. The varied character roster contains weapons, a rarity for the genre, and its 16th century backdrop sits in stark contrast to most fighting games' arbitrarily modern day setting. Soul Calibur 3 pushes its identity even further. The character creation mode is deeper than ever before. The title is stuffed with various gameplay types, including, for better or worse, an RTS mode. But most importantly, there was just a lot to look at in-game. Beyond terrific character models, Soul Calibur 3 has some truly incredible fighting locations. Arenas aren't locked to a specific place and now can move around you, like the raft on a river or a rotating platform in a clock tower. They're a joy to simply spectate, let alone fight in yourself, adding some real eye candy to the whole proceedings. The fact that, unlike other entries in the series, Soul Calibur 3 was exclusive to PS2 meant that Namco could focus on getting the most out of the console, and it truly shows as the game still looks beautiful. Number 4, Resident Evil 4. This is a unique entry, of course, because Resident Evil 4 famously isn't native to the PlayStation 2. In fact, if anything, it exists because of Capcom's at first aversion to the system's specs. They elected to take the survival horror franchise to the Nintendo GameCube, but found out quickly the system's reach was limited. So as such, the fact that Resident Evil 4 got ported over to the PS2 is miraculous, as it was originally designed in spite of it. Regardless, it's pretty common knowledge that Resi 4 changed the action shooter genre in a myriad of ways with its over-the-shoulder aiming and interactable environments. It gave players more room to move, but in turn allowed their enemies to approach them from any angle. It was a stroke of genius that completely changed the industry, even more so when it landed in front of the PlayStation 2's huge audience. Its style inspired the Gears of War series, its atmospheric storytelling had a huge effect on Uncharted, and we wouldn't have modern classics like The Last of Us without it. Additionally, of course, it's a game that inspires awe for Capcom having the brass to make such a huge shift away from the established formula in the first place. It was a massive risk to completely change everything about the wildly popular Biohazard franchise that, as time has repeatedly proven, paid off. Number 3, Final Fantasy XI. Final Fantasy XI marked a great departure for the RPG series. It was going online for the first time ever and reaching out to multiple formats. As such, most people associate the game with the PC. However, it actually first released in March 2002 in Japan for the PS2. What's most important, in fact, is that the PS2 version was the baseline for its further PC and eventually Xbox 360 editions. What this means is that the successes of future releases of FF11 don't happen without its PS2 sibling. Whilst it was always the most underpowered port, it still blows our minds that this was even possible. The PS2 had never been built with online functionality in mind, only adopted later in the face of competition from Xbox Live. FF11 is considered an early entry in console MMOs, not to mention the first ever that could handle cross-platform play, and it set a standard with its minimal UI and controller-friendly commands. Despite being treated as a forgettable footnote, nowadays the Final Fantasy XI console servers enjoyed a healthy healthy 14-year-long life before they were switched off in 2016. Number 2, Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty. Much has been said about the many ways that Metal Gear Solid 2 blows players' minds, whether it's back in 2001 or the current day. Its protagonist bait-and-switch, marriage of Japanese and American storytelling elements, and a plot about using misinformation as a weapon that is more poignant today than ever. These are all good reasons to feature Sons of Liberty on this list, but more than this, it looks incredible. Where the original MGS somehow turned the polygonal architecture of the PlayStation 1 into surprisingly enrapturing cinema, 3 years later MGS2's graphics are a genuine wonder to behold. On top of this, the world of MGS2 pushed gaming technology into new standards. The rain in the opening tanker level bouncing off of Snake and the ground below him was something previously thought impossible. The game's proud usage of reflections really made it stand out, with shiny floors and mirrors that were enabled by the brilliant trickery of completely mimicking the game world between a semi-transparent surface. The shadows are dynamic and can even impact your gameplay, as guards can spot a hiding player from their shadow. The level of artistry on display helped MGS2 remain one of the best looking games for the rest of the PS2's life, and it's a landmark in pushing the medium forwards. And number 1, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. The PlayStation 2 has one of the best game libraries in history, but it wouldn't have been quite as successful as it was without Grand Theft Auto. GTA 3 represents a major turning point in the series. Vice City remains perhaps the most stylish entry in the franchise today, but San Andreas was truly an incredible feat. Obviously, the most stunning factor of this pedestrian pummeling sequel is that its map is more than 3 times bigger than its predecessor. This allows for a wealth of location variety, including introducing the American countryside to the series for the first time. And whilst this is clearly done with some caveats like a heavily reduced draw distance, what's most important is that the game engine doesn't suffer at all with this sudden size increase. Better yet, the entire state of San Andreas is explorable with no visible load times. True freedom in gaming felt within reach, and to demonstrate this, there was more player customization. Not just clothes and hair, but how you choose to play as CJ has an effect. Work out and he becomes stronger and can run for longer, eat too much fast food and he'll put on weight and thus lose stamina. Its graphics aren't exactly revolutionary, but it doesn't really matter. All of this fitting on a single PS2 disc with no issue is still jaw-dropping. The idea of open world had never been this open before. Now, GTA is a series that is no stranger to controversy, and there have been certain elements over the years that have had to have been tweaked to make the ratings board happy. Check out this video on screen now for 10 instances of hilarious video game censorship. Leave a comment down below what PS2 games blow your mind still. Like this video, subscribe, head over to WhatCulture.com for more content every day. I've been Cy for What Culture, and have a good week.